Hello, everyone, and welcome to Returning to Work in a Vaccinated World, Best Practices for a Smooth Transition. And I'd like to welcome today Ryan Nell, Esquire for Petticoat and Gracia Lutz and Dolan. He is a shareholder and leader with the company. He represents California employers statewide in both counseling and comprehensive litigation. So we're very excited to have Ryan here today. And Ryan, I will give it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here. We've got a small group today, but that's great because it means that anyone who wants to jump in and ask questions, we can do that. I've got a ton of information for you here. If you've been to any of my presentations before, I always feel like I say the same thing. I hate slides. I wish I didn't have to use them and I could just stand up in front of a room and talk. But right now, we're standing in front of computer screens, and I've got a lot of information that I want you to have. So I've given it in the form of just meaty, just dense slides. My goal here today is not to read them to you. You can all read, but to talk about them. And to put it in a way that you can then take it back and go to your organizations with which you do business and the like, and have materials that you can make use of. And that you can help kind of digest and refresh your recollection about the things we talked about. So don't be alarmed or shocked by the amount of words on some of these slides. It's just, it's a dense subject and it's something that we want to make sure we're going through. And by the way, all my contact information is on here. So for the folks that are participating here today, feel free to jump in, ask questions. I should be able to see a chat box if it pops up, but we've got a small group, so speak up if you'd like. I'd like for this to go in whatever direction it can. Since it's a smaller group and if it's not as chatty, we may go a little shorter and leave time at the end for questions. We'll figure out what to do. It's all very nebulous to me, and I'm happy to go in whatever direction is best. I also encourage those of you here, if you have questions you don't want to ask in kind of the group recorded setting, or those of you back home watching this online, wherever you are, reach out to me anytime. Under normal circumstances, I really like standing in front of a group, and there's always that nice time after the presentation's done where people come up and they ask questions that for whatever reason they may not have wanted to ask in front of a group, and so they want to ask it one-on-one, and we can't really do that exactly the same as I'm sitting in my office and you're sitting wherever you all are. But call me, email me. I want to be a resource. I've done quite a few things, well, a good handful of things, and hopefully more with the Carlsbad Chamber, and we love to do more. I want to be a resource to all of you and all of your membership. So here's what we're going to talk about today. For the last almost 18 months now, COVID's been on the tip of everyone's tongue, obviously, in the world, and particularly for California employers, right? Because we're dealing not just with the impacts on our families and on our travel schedules and on our lives and hopefully not, but potentially our health, but the impact on our day-to-day work lives. And we've had to roll with the punches on it. We've had to see legislation and the sprinklings of litigation coming through on this stuff. And it's been complicated, it's been fast moving, and it's been ever changing, right? So back in March and April of last year, we were talking about the FFCRA, and we were trying to figure out what to do about it and what it all means and how to interpret it. Not too long after that, we got some interpretation, and it turned out some of our guesses were wrong, right? And we dealt with that through the end of the calendar year. We knew we had a new presidential administration coming in, so we had to wait and see what would happen. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But we also have the state level stuff. We have, Cal OSHA has issued quite a bit of guidance that impacts us as California employers. And in fact, they just did issue some significant new guidance back on June 17th. So long before we booked this program, long after we booked this program, did we find out about this. So obviously that's what I'm going to lead with today, and I'm going to work it in. And again, if there are questions that come up, great. Otherwise, I'll just kind of talk at you for a while. So what are we talking about here with the Cal OSHA update? So this is much anticipated, and we started to hear rumblings of it in May. We knew something was going to happen because there was the original emergency temporary standard that was put into place back in November of 2019. As you may recall, that enacted a relatively high bar, onerous standard, whatever you want to call for what Cal OSHA was telling us had to be done. to ensure compliance and safety in the workplace. We knew that as the governor began to lift general requirements for the state, and we had this June 15th date in mind, we knew that something was going to happen with Cal OSHA. We began to hear rumblings, even though they're separate, right? You know, the way something works for what you need to do mask wise and what you need to do in the general world, walking around, going to the grocery store, et cetera, is different than in the employment setting. Because we knew that something was going to happen on June 15th in the general sector, we had this strong feeling that something was going to happen with OSHA. And there were a few iterations. OSHA had a hard time figuring out exactly what to do. And they, in fact, passed through the committee stage an initial plan that talked about, you know, the thing on the tip of everyone's tongue the most was masks and when it can be masks. And they initially said that folks needed to wear a mask if anyone in a room was not vaccinated. And they backed up on that and they changed their policy. I'm sorry, I saw my face freeze. I think we're good. Okay. So here's what we now have, and this was put into place on June 17th. So just under 2 weeks ago, and it became effective immediately. Typically there's a 10-day process, but Governor Newsom came in, signed an executive order and said, this is now the law, or this is the effective guidance for the state of California for employers. So there are a number of different subsections of the ETS revision, and I want to talk about each of them. You know, the biggest thing that we get questions about is vaccines and vaccine status and masking and how that implicates things. But I think we need to go through each and every one of those factors. So first, we have the impact on social distancing requirements. Now, largely they've been removed, but there are still circumstances when they are not. For example, that can be when an unvaccinated employee is eating or drinking. Reason being that an unvaccinated employee who's eating or drinking does not need to wear a mask while eating or drinking for obvious reasons. So there needs to be social distancing. There also needs to be a social distancing in place if there's an outbreak. Now, we've talked in previous trainings, and we're going to talk a little bit about it today about what an outbreak is. Typically, an outbreak is 3 or more lab-confirmed cases in a workplace or in a work setting. So in a situation like that, where you have an outbreak, social distancing is required. And then it's still required if the unvaccinated employee cannot wear a mask, right? So you can imagine situations where there's just a possibility where someone who's not vaccinated can't wear a mask, and it doesn't work. So there, in those situations, you need to bit of a misclassification of a nomenclature, but you kind of engage in something sort of like the reasonable accommodation process, right? To figure out what is necessary. And in this case, you need to have social distancing. So mask requirements. Now, let's take a little bit of a step back. It's important to note that companies can still implement policies that they want to. They're businesses, they can choose to do things. So there are lots of companies that are choosing to continue to have mask requirements, at least at this stage. That's okay. Companies can do that, and that's their prerogative, right? But companies now know that they are permitted to not require masks, right? That used to not be the case. Under the previous guidance, you needed to. There were all this list of so many different rules that said that masks had to be required, certain places, all these times. Now that's not the case. So if those who are fully vaccinated are no longer required to wear face coverings indoors, except the times that I mentioned, mostly for social distancing, or if there's an outbreak, or if everyone has to wear it, then vaccinated people do. Unvaccinated people must continue to wear masks with some exceptions. And the exceptions are kind of the logical ones you would expect. So for example, if they're alone by themselves, so if someone is unvaccinated, I will tell you, I am vaccinated, have been for some time, but when I'm sitting in my office, if I wasn't vaccinated, I could sit here without a mask. That's not a problem. Or if I was in my car, if I was a driver, whatever it was. While eating or drinking, of course, but remember that there needs to be the 6 feet of social distancing. Respirators got worked in, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, about what the requirements for respirators are, the provision of respirators to employees at no cost as necessary. So if a respirator is being worn in place of a face covering, that can be the case. Now, if there's a medical or health reason, you need to be able to work with the employee. So again, this is where we need to work with them and figure out if there is a reason why they cannot wear the mask. So for example, if you have a hearing impaired employee that needs to communicate in a certain way, or something like that, where it is not possible to communicate or to perform job duties in a way where the mask can be worn, then you're going to go through that process. But you don't want to immediately jump to it. And then last but not least, if there's a reason why for a particular task they can't. This, of course, all goes away if there is an outbreak, then masks need to come back on. And by the way, I've been using the term mask and face covering interchangeably now. That's a bit hasty, a bit sloppy by me. I will admit, I think it's just easier to say mask than it is face covering. But we know from Cal OSHA, we have some guidance on what technically a face covering is. And it's not what some may have thought it was early on, especially in the early days, you saw people covering themselves with all sorts of different things. Cal OSHA now tells us that for purposes of the workplace, there are only very specific things that need to, or that can qualify as face coverings. So surgical masks, masks for medical procedures, or things that are basically double layered, or respirators. So what that doesn't include, scarves, the balaclavas that you kind of put up as a gaiter, bandanas, pulling up your turtleneck, things that are just single layers. I was on an airplane that I had to fly last July or August for a family emergency. I had to get on a plane, a short flight. I was on an airline that shall remain nameless, and our flight attendant had on a mask, but it was like lace, like clear see-through. And it's like, what are we doing here? So that flight attendant would not be in compliance with the mask regulations as we have them here under Cal OSHA today. Anecdote, but something to keep in mind. I think at this point, people have a pretty good understanding of what satisfies a requirement for face covering, but now we have it in plain black and white from Cal OSHA, and I think that's a helpful thing. Respirators. Now, this is a new nuance that was built into this Cal OSHA guidance, and it tells us that we need to be able to provide respirators to our employees at no cost. There are some resources out there, and I'd be happy if anyone needs it, I can share it with you. We had some internal emails at my firm about this, about some places that are state agencies offering access to respirators for like a month's supply for free. So if your company is in need and needs a resource, I'm happy to make that or not make the introduction, but provide you with a resource that I saw for what it's worth. Also, if employees choose to use respirators, they can't be retaliated against. And I think this is an important point for all of this. There's this general conception that those who are not wearing masks are people who are vaccinated, and those who are wearing masks are people who are unvaccinated. That's not necessarily the case. For any number of reasons, someone can choose to wear a mask for any reason. They can have every single shot there is of every different kind, whatever. If they choose to wear a mask, that's their own prerogative. And that's particularly written into the Cal OSHA guidance. We as employers cannot retaliate against people for doing that. And it's up to them if they want to. So if someone is fully vaccinated, but they're more comfortable wearing a mask in the workplace, they are welcome and able and encouraged to do so. This also is kind of goes to the interesting kind of wisdom of this guidance, right? Is you don't want to create witch hunts in the workplace. And that's what Cal OSHA struggled to try to figure out how to avoid. And I think they kind of started to miss the mark with the idea of, okay, well, if there's one unvaccinated person in the room, everyone needs to wear masks. Well, that's going to have the, not necessarily, but the likely outcome of everyone looking at that person saying, hey, you're the one, let's go get your vaccine. And they're forcing people to do stuff. And it makes uncomfortable situations. Now, you can have people in the workplace who choose for whatever reason to wear a mask. And it could be because they're unvaccinated and they want to. Okay. Or it could be because they're vaccinated and they want to. That's fine too. But it allows for that opportunity. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that Cal OSHA probably realizes as well that there still is going to be a bit of peer pressure associated with all of this, right? Because the more people that are not wearing masks, that means the more people are getting vaccinated. And so if there are fewer people that are wearing masks, there's going to be kind of this groundswell among our employees of people saying, hey, go get your vaccine, go get your vaccine. Whether it's from the powers that be or from colleagues, from supporters, from whomever, it's going to happen. And I think that's something that as employers, we want to be aware of, because it is not our place to tell, well, let me just take a step back. There are opportunities to encourage and potentially require vaccination. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. However, it's a difficult line to walk, because there can be lots of reasons why someone would choose not to get a vaccine, and then why they can choose not to get a vaccine. So what I don't want and what I'm wary of is exerting too much pressure or allowing too much pressure to be exerted by employees on other employees of whatever rank and file it is, because it opens a door that I'd prefer not be opened. It creates an inference that I prefer not be created. So let's keep that in mind as we're working through these policies, okay? Notice requirements. There are already some guidance on what needs to happen when a exposure is, or excuse me, when there is an incident of COVID in the workplace. We now know that you need to provide, now this is tweaked slightly. So we already had a couple of an Assembly bill and a Senate bill that passed almost a year ago, addressing who needs to be notified and when, but this is the new guidance. So we need to make sure that we're following this. And it looks at when notice must be provided. And ultimately it's within 1 business day, the employer is informed or should know of a COVID case. And it needs to be in writing and it needs to get out to everyone. So we got a little more guidance on the manner in which that can happen. The short version is it needs to be in writing, right? So a phone tree doesn't do it. There needs to be written notice. And it also is a question of who needs to be provided notice, right? So it's all employees that were at the work site during the high exposure period, right? But also if there are independent contractors or other employers that were there. And if you are a union shop, which some of you may be, you need to make sure that authorized representatives are made aware as well. So this is really important at this point for companies that have been back in the workplace, potentially throughout all of this or recently or whatever. You've probably dealt with this. You've probably dealt with noticing there aren't many employers that haven't had just at least send one of those emails out. But I share this, one, because the rule has changed and it's nuanced a little, but also because I don't know what stage all of you are in the process. What I mean by that, and we're going to talk about this in a bit later, some of you may have been humming along all this time, right? You've been in the workplace, you're in an essential sector, you've been working. So this is old hat. Okay, I understand that, and that's wonderful that you are experienced, you get it. Others have been shut down or are just getting back into things or have been remote, and now they're dealing with the implications of having people come back to the office or back to the work site, and what happens when people get sick, and what happens when people don't want to work, or what happens when people have to take time off. And this is the first time they're thinking of it. So I apologize to those of you to whom I'm preaching to the choir, and you know all of this. I hope you can find some nuance in what I'm talking about, but I need to make sure I get the broadest breadth of coverage for those who just haven't yet had to dip their toes into this. So that's why it's important that we talk about all of this. What we need to do when there's exclusion of employees, if an employee is fully vaccinated and doesn't develop symptoms and they were exposed to a COVID positive case, they do not need to be excluded from the workplace. Okay, so that's important. Then the question is, if an employee is not vaccinated, we have some additional guidance on what happens if there are symptoms or no symptoms. The short version is effectively it's 10 days or 10 days since the last contact. But we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on this. So if you have people who are unvaccinated and have symptoms, make sure you're following it. If you are in a healthcare field, social service, emergency responder, there are slightly different requirements. Sometimes it can be down to 7 days. So pay particular attention to that. Make sure that you're thinking about what needs to be done when you can welcome people back into the workplace, such that you don't want to, the line that has to be walked here, I think this is an important factor, is you need to walk the line between the right in the right of employees to come in and earn their living and make money and put food on their table, and your effectively obligation to maintain a safe workplace, right? Cal OSHA is occupational safety and health, right? So it's worried about the safety and health of your employees. And so if you allow someone to come back too soon, well, they may be clamoring, they may be saying, hey, I'm ready to go, I want to work. Yeah, but what if they get other people sick? And then you're not worried, you're not appropriately helping out those who need to stay healthy, who are there minding their own business, right? It's difficult, it's frustrating. I can't tell you how many calls I've got to call this afternoon with somebody that dealt with this. It's a company that runs effectively an auto body, a bit different than that. They do like custom detailing, they do stuff like that. So it's cool stuff. They had the most horrible revolving door where they just kept on having like one person out at a time. And it was just this constant, how do you time it and make sure when's the last contact? It was a mess. And they were frustrated and their employees were frustrated, but we had to do it the right way. And we had to walk through it. It felt more like a math problem than a legal problem, if I'm being candid. but we had to do it. They got out the other side. I had to call with them this afternoon. It was completely separate. They want to fire somebody. They're back to that stuff now. But it's difficult. It's frustrating. I know. We're not out of the woods yet. There's still frustration. We still have meetings internally about what we do about all this stuff. And we have, a third of our firm is employment attorneys. That may make it worse because we all want to be the smartest guy in the room on this stuff, I guess. But it's complicated and it's frustrating. Bear with it. We'll get through. Okay. So if you are going to rely on vaccination status, you need to ask about it, right? And so there are 3 ways that it can be kept. I think this is important. Employees can, one is they can self-attest, right? So they can say, I'm vaccinated. Then the employee maintains a confidential record of that. The next is you provide proof and you record it, or they can show to the employer and they provide a copy of it. So the employer keeps it. So it's either, hey, I attest, here's my card, or here is a copy of my card that I'm giving you. It's up to the employer what they choose to do. I will tell you, I don't have a hugely strong preference on any of these. I think, better to actually see things in the flesh, but, or in black and white, I should say, but I can see how different companies would choose to do it different ways. Importantly, if someone says they don't want to share their vaccination documentation, that's okay. They are able to do that and they can say that, but for purposes of policy and face coverings and the like, they must be treated as unvaccinated. Okay, so keep that in mind. The last thing on our Cal OSHA, it's already been 25 minutes and I've been talking just about this new stuff. I hope that's productive, is testing. So testing needs to be offered at no cost in a number of instances, right? So if there's exposure, if there's symptoms, if there's major outbreak at the workplace, we need to put these processes in place. So what that means to you as an employee, do the legwork in advance, figure out options. If you are, for example, you're the HR professional, HR manager at your firm, or you're the person or your company, you are the person who handles that. You're the person to whom people go. You're the CEO. You're the whatever that is going to get that question asked of you. Have the answer first. Take the time now, if you haven't had to think about it yet, figure out what options there are, where you can send people. So that way, if someone comes in and says, hey, I'm not feeling well, I think I got sick. Yeah, okay, great. Go down here, take a test. Give them our information. Or it's already signed, it's already lined up, they'll have your name. Great. Better to do that and be proactive about it than reactive. And I think that that's an important factor to keep in mind with all of this. The companies that have done the best in handling COVID throughout the process are those that have been proactive rather than reactive. And I realize we're now 17 months into this. And so even if you wanted to be proactive, that time has already passed. Still, think about these things before they arise. What are we going to do when someone says, they come back to the workplace, oh, no, I need to work from home. What are they going to do when they make requests? What are they going to do when they get sick? What are they going to do when their family members get sick? The more you can think about all of that in advance and have, at the very least, a loose plan, the better served you'll be. And I'll tell you candidly, I've got clients on both sides of the coin. I've been preaching this to them the whole time. I've got ones who want to have big, long, hours-long phone calls. Excuse me, let's go through every possible iteration. Let's talk through what are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if this happens? Boom, 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 boom. And then they're ready. And, maybe they don't ever need to deal with any of those. And maybe it's, they could have saved the time and saved the money not worrying about it. Maybe. But I've also had lots of companies that call me and say, oh my God, we just got, there's an outbreak. We got someone sick, someone requested time off. What do? We haven't thought about it yet. And it can all be handled and it'll all be okay. But I would have much preferred, and the company in that moment would have much preferred to have a time machine to go back and have a plan in place before. So let's talk about vaccines. We've now, it's been about 6 months since kind of the rollout of vaccines in the country. It's been about 2 months since access has been extremely high, right? So to the point that if you don't have a vaccine, you can walk into a Walgreens or CVS right now and get it, meaning that everyone who wants one effectively, with limited exception, can get one. So that has changed the way we've talked about vaccination policies throughout the process. Early on, what I was saying is, look, we got to wait and see. I don't want to tell my employees to get vaccinated when they can't get access to it if they wanted to. I mean, we can encourage, that's one thing, but requirements are tough. Now, where does the next nuance come? Well, the EEOC, which is the Federal Equal Employment and Opportunity Commission, it is a federal arm. We have the DFEH here in California, and has said that employers are permitted to require employees to be vaccinated. However, there's some arguments against that, right? Or there's some nuance on that I think are important to talk about. One is that there can be reasons why not, right? So, for example, if someone has a deeply held religious belief, they have a medical condition that prohibits them or precludes them from receiving the vaccination, that's a valid reason not to. There's also a strong argument that as it stands right now, the COVID vaccine has been approved for emergency use. So there's an argument that someone can say, I don't want to take a vaccine that's only been approved for emergency use, not general use. And, I haven't seen cases on this yet. There will be. It's not a bad argument. It's not a bad argument to say, well, maybe you really can't force the issue. So I say all that to kind of offer my opinion on best practices. This is not the law. This is as I see it getting played out, what seems to make sense. And that's to say, anecdotally, the companies that I've worked with that have kind of forced the issue and those that have encouraged the issue see about the same rate of vaccination, right? So I do a lot of work in RCFEs, residential care facilities for the elderly, right? Which, as you could imagine, I mean, those are facilities that were getting hit really hard with COVID in the early days. They still are, right? They're still walking a very narrow tightrope trying to get through all of this. And they want all their people to get vaccinated. But the problem is, but let me tell you anecdotally, you might be surprised the frequency or the lack of frequency with which a lot of employees are choosing to get vaccinated. And companies that are trying to force the issue aren't always having success, because then people always have a reason, right? If someone really doesn't want to get vaccinated, they're going to come up and they're going to say, well, I can't for this reason. And now you're going to have to start being the arbiter of whether or not that reason is good. If they're checking the right box, you really can't be. And that's difficult. So my suggestion is, the people who really don't want to get vaccinated aren't. And that's fine. And I'm not questioning the wisdom of it. I'm just saying, as a fact, I do believe personally that people who choose that they decide in their heart of hearts they're not going to, it's going to be hard to get them to do it. And they're going to say they can't for whatever reason. Okay. So what value is there to forcing it if you really can't force it versus if you just encourage it, right? If you tell your employees, we want you to do it. There are companies that are doing incentives. There are companies that are offering money. There's, airlines early on, right? Because air travel is picking back up. I think it was American Airlines had this big program out where, hey, get vaccinated, you get this money, this time off, this everything. And a lot of companies have followed suit. Great, be creative, figure out what you can do. Now, I've gotten some interesting questions about, well, is that discriminatory? Because if someone can't get the vaccine because of, for example, a medical reason or a health or a religious reason, then they don't have access to this potential bonus or whatever it is. Yeah, somebody's going to raise that issue. I don't know if it's going to be against you. I don't know if that's the thing that I really want to worry about. If I'm a company, I don't know if that keeps me up at night. It's an interesting point, something to keep in mind. But you all know your workplaces far better than I do, right? You work with them every day. You're thinking about what their sensitivities are, what they're looking to do, what worries them, what keeps them up at night, what they want to do in terms of a vaccine. So think about that. It's naive to say that this is all one size fits all, right? So you need to think about the industry that you're in. You need to think about the types of workforce you have. You need to think about where they're working. You need to think about the contact that they're having with employers. You need to think about the issues that could happen if they're not vaccinated and what that can expose you to from a workers' comp standpoint or for a business operations standpoint. All of these are considerations. And ultimately, you should be having those discussions. And the fact that the vaccines are now pretty readily available means you probably have been having these discussions. But if you haven't, do it now. Finish watching this and then go speak with whomever powers that be you need to in your organization and put your heads together and decide what you want to do. And understand that may change, but decide what you want to do based on what you have right now and potentially based on how things might go in the future. Okay. I have additional legislative update, right? So there's guidance at the state, local, federal level, right? That was a bad way to say it. Local, state, federal level. about all of this. We had the FFCRA back last year that ended December 31st, and then we now know we have the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA. Some people call it ARPA. That sounds a little too canine for my taste, so I call it ARPA. And it's been in place for a while, almost 4 months now, or when it was signed. It went into effect a little bit later, a little bit later. But at this point, you probably know what's going on with ARPA. More PPP programs. There's some restaurant things that if you were in the service industry, you'll want to make sure you've apprised yourself of if you haven't already, or at least have looked into it. There's been COBRA premium subsidies, right? So anyone who's lost their job because of COVID, there's a subsidy that you pay their COBRA, and then you can get a reimbursement from the federal government, right? Assuming that the appropriate boxes are checked. So what all this means is it should be on your radar. You want to make sure that to the extent there are benefits available, you want to either avail yourselves of them or at least understand the options for what the opportunities of which you can avail yourself. So take a look at all of that and look at it against the backdrop of California supplemental paid sick leave. Okay. So you may recall that back in last year, so back in 2020, there was kind of a gap between the FFCRA and coverage. So California created some supplemental leave for larger employers, for healthcare employers. That sunsetted out, but then we got a new piece of guidance for all employers more than 25 employees, right? So now we have this new supplemental paid sick leave for statistically not all employers, but quite a few, large chunk of that pie chart. And it took effect on March 29th. So it was signed about, what was that now, 3 months ago, but it's retroactive and it expires on September 30th. So we've got a 9-month window that is now creating this new supplemental paid sick leave in addition to normal sick leave. So we've had sick leave on the books in California since 2015, I believe. That should already be something you're doing. You should be following the rules on that. But we now have California supplemental paid sick leave, which provides supplemental paid sick leave for the following reasons. Now, again, wordy slide. I have that so I can list all 7 of them for you. Suffice to say, this tracks very closely with the FFCRA's guidance. Not exactly, it's a little bit nuanced, but these are the places where we need to provide that leave. We also include now if someone is getting a vaccination or is having vaccination-related issues. So keep this in mind. Again, this may be something that's been on your radar since it was with the FFCRA last year. It may have come on your radar this year in late March when it came in, or you may be a company that's just starting back up and this is the first time you're thinking about it. In this case, I'm talking to that latter group, and I apologize to the former 2. It's important that we know this. And so if I'm preaching to the choir, I apologize, but I hope that you're getting something here. Okay, eligibility. So it's up to 80 hours of leave. If it's a part-time employee, it ratchets down based on effectively the average hours they work. There's calculation in there. We can talk about that if we need to, but effectively it's the average. There needs to be a request. It can be retroactive and it has to be honored. So if they say, hey, for whatever reason number 3, I need to do X, I need time off because I'm caring for someone or because my child care, we need to take them at their word. And I've had a lot of questions about this throughout the last year and a half between FFCRA and now supplemental paid sick leave of employers going, I know my employee is just trying to get by on me. You're right. Not all of them, but some of them. Yeah, absolutely. But I'll also remind you that this is a tale as old as time, right? This isn't the first time an employee is called up and said they're sick and then, I'm sick. And then you hear the seagulls behind them in the background, right? That happens. If an employee wants to effectively engage in fraud because you're gonna pay them, they're gonna lie, we're gonna do it, right? And we're gonna grit our teeth and do it, but we need to because they're going to sign on the dotted line proverbially and say, I need this. Okay? Make sure as well that you have notice. There's notice that's been provided by the Department of Industrial Relations. Make sure you have those postings. So either in your, if you got a break room, wherever it is, if your people are remote, make sure that it's sent out to them by email or some other means to ensure that they receive it. And finally, this is kind of a supplemental conversation, but just keep in mind that we have the expanded California Family Rights Act, CFRA, as it's more often known. It used to be for 50 or more employees. It's now for 5 or more. So that means that just about every employer in the state is covered by expanded CFRA. That means that leave may be taken for a number of reasons and is broadened, right? So it's spouses, it's children, it's grandparents, it's grandchildren. Number of other factors were slightly amended as well. So if you are an employer that had, let's say you had 40 employees and you always said, oh, CFRA doesn't apply to me. Now it does, right? Been about a year now, a little less than a year. So this is not particularly new, but it's an important thing to keep in mind as we talk about COVID leave issues, because it can come into play. It may not have been something that was on your radar. It should now be. Also, it's a good opportunity to take a look at your handbooks, take a look at your policies. This may now apply to you when it formerly didn't. So keep that in mind as you're going through things. Okay, return to work issues. And so again, I understand that some of you, maybe all of you that are watching this, oh, I got a chat. Let's see what we got. So the question is, can employees take leave more than once if they've been exposed or are sick more than once? They can, but they only get a certain amount of California supplemental paid sick leave. So if they use up their 80 hours, then that's exhausted. It needs to be on their pay stubs, by the way. So, if they are sick, for example, then it may be difficult for them to use that in 2 chunks because they need to be out a certain amount of time. But if they're caring for someone, if there's childcare reasons that needs to happen in chunks, yes, it can. But on top of that, there could be leave issues, right? So if someone has to, they can get the paid leave through the California Supplemental Paid Sick Leave, but then they need to just take off unpaid leave time for some related reason later down the road. As long as they're still eligible and the employer is large enough, then that can qualify. I've given, especially pre-COVID, now all I talk about is COVID, right? But I did a big speaking series like January 2020, right before everything went nuts, about leave. We called it alphabet soup and all the different leave things. And one thing that I said at one of them, and then I kind of liked it, and so I kept saying it because it seemed to resonate, is, if you're thinking about leave with your employees and you have like a gotcha moment, like you're thinking, aha, I got you, employee, you're out of leave, and now I'm going to fire you. I'm going to just stop it. Don't do that. So we don't want to get ourselves in a position where we're thinking, they don't have enough. No, I know that wasn't the purpose of the question we just got, but I'm saying generally work backwards from yes. And so if someone needs leave, they may have exhausted their California supplemental paid sick leave. Okay, that's fine. Let's see if they're eligible for CFRA. Let's see if, as an accommodation, we need to put them on unpaid leave. Very often we can, and it is a reasonable accommodation, so we need to look at doing that. Okay, take a quick drink here. I've been talking for 45 minutes straight. Okay, so return to work issues. Again, I understand. There we go. I understand that some of you may have been at work throughout all of this. I will tell you candidly, I've been in the office. I started coming back late May of last year and haven't stopped. Right, we work with a lot of companies that are in essential sectors that we support. That we have to be here. Well, we can be places, but there's tremendous value in being in the office and needing to work with them. A ton of counseling. So I've been here, and frankly, I like it. My wife's an attorney. She does estate planning. So same idea, right? They do. They work with people who need, especially in the time of pandemic, they need help. They need help quickly. And so she started going back to the office, and I was losing my ever-loving mind sitting at home after about 2 days. And so I started coming back in. So being in the office is old hat for me, and it may be for all of you, but it may not be. So let's think about what we can do. When is the right time to open? We're looking at a number of factors. We now know that it's very likely, depending on your business, right? There may be some very narrow industries where you can't be open yet, but it is legal to reopen and to come back, especially based on lifted executive orders. But then there's the safety issue. How will it happen? And there's the emotional issue. How do your employees feel about it? And different companies, different groups of employees feel different ways. Even within companies, there are different people that feel differently. I have lots of clients where they say, these people love it and want to come back all day, every day. These people never want to see us again. Okay. That's a difficult thing to deal with, but it's a conversation you have to have. And, I think there are companies that are choosing to bury their head in the sand and say, I don't know what to do. look, eventually you're going to have to make a decision. And I think not having those conversations at the executive, the leadership level early is a disservice because ultimately there's going to be an issue. And it's going to be forced. The world, we're getting closer to back to normal, not all the way there. We're getting closer. Eventually we will. And then we need to know what to do. Now, I will also say, and this isn't news to anyone, that there will be people who have said, prior to COVID, I want to work from home. I want to work from home. And stop me if you've heard this before. The employer says, you can't do your job at home. Well, now we have 14, 15, 16 months of empirical data saying that, yes, in fact, people can do their work at home. Not all of them, but some of them. And it makes it a lot harder to say that you can't get work done at home. So we're going to have to be prepared for those conversations. On the other hand, lots of people aren't nearly as efficient at home. There's the couch, there's the TV, there's the bed they can nap, there's the dog to walk, there's the kids to teach, there's all this stuff. There are some people who are more efficient at home. Most people are not. That's not the law. I can't point to data. I believe that wholeheartedly. And ultimately, you pay your employees to do work, right? And so you can look at that, and it's a counseling opportunity. People aren't getting their work done, and you're paying them to do that work. Well, it's not unreasonable for you to expect them to do the work that's expected of them, but you need to cage that conversation appropriately. So figure that out. Figure out what to do when they come back. So if you need to reorganize, if you need to change schedules, we now know that social distancing in the workplace, as we were talking about earlier, is more abridged or only necessary under more limited circumstances, but it still exists under certain ones. So make sure that you're prepared for that. Make sure you stay compliant, right? You need to continue compliance with all the ongoing health requirements. We're going to get more from Cal OSHA at some point, hard to say when. We need to keep an eye on benefits. We know that there's federal benefits, state benefits, and the like. Make sure we're keeping an eye on them. Look at exempt status. This is something that I am seeing a lot of, and it's concerning to me because I can see it as a potential issue for lawsuits. Here's what I mean by that. An exempt employee is an employee who's exempt from overtime, right? A bit of a simplification, but exempt from overtime requirements. So they don't track their hours, they don't track their meal and rest breaks, they just work. To make it even more simple, an hourly employee is paid for the time, an exempt employee is paid for the work. Now that's just blatant simplification, but the point I'm trying to make by that is to say an exempt employee just gets a salary, right? To qualify for that, what we sometimes forget is that they need to perform exempt work and they need to meet the standards for exemption. So they need to get past the salary test, but they need to pass the exemption test and the duties test. So what we're seeing is people who may qualify when they're in the workplace, the things that they do are enough to qualify for exemption. But then they go home and the work is different. They don't have the right stuff to do, and they're just not spending the same amount of time on the same amount of time on exempt tests. Well, now all of a sudden they may not I'm having a hard time here. They may not qualify anymore for exemption. So what's the most extreme example? You have your CEO. And your CEO runs the company 100% of the time when he or she is in the workplace, and then goes home and is working from home. And it turns out that he or she spends 51% of the time opening the mail because there's nothing left to do. Well, that's not an exempt task. And because it's not an exempt task and it's a quantitative approach, it's more than half their time is a non-exempt task. That person is no longer qualified as an exempt employee and should be qualified for overtime. Now, is that going to happen to your CEO? No. Very likely not. But for someone where it was a closer call to begin with, and now we have them opening mail or we have them doing more clerical things or whatever, there could be an issue. So keep that in mind, okay? Last but not least on this subject, we need to be aware of what we're dealing with, right? We're going to have frustrated employees. We're going to have sick employees. We're going to have opportunistic employees. Those are the people who know what the law says and they know how to fake it and all. We got to roll with the punches because ultimately, what we want to avoid is the fourth thing out there, litigious employees. We're starting to see the lawsuits now. Every case I get now that's filed recently, there's something in it saying, my client complained about COVID protocols, complained about safety, complained about PPE, complained about whatever. And because of that, that's why they got fired. Or so that, and we can dismiss that, right? We know what happened, but my employee didn't get reimbursed. Oh, they were incurring costs while they were at home and they had to work at home and they didn't get reimbursed. That could be a problem. we're starting to see those. We're starting to see those as class actions, right? On behalf of all employees that didn't get reimbursed at a company. Well, now there may be some teeth to it if we don't have the right kind of policies in place. So we want to make sure, and that's, I'm going to go to the next slide for our new normal, that we have policies in place to try our best to ensure that as we move into this new normal, which is ever changing, the workplace, the workforce looks different. I can see the 5 freeway from my office right now. I can tell you what, there's a whole heck of a lot more cars, especially in the morning and the evening, because people are going to work again, but things are still a little bit different and they're going to stay a little bit different. So we need to keep that in mind as we traverse our way to the new normal. Figure out where our people need to work. How can they work? Where can they work? What can they do? How can they meet their obligations, stay happy, stay content? I can't tell each of you what to do for your company because I don't know. You know what works best for your people, but you need to think about it. You need to talk about it. You need to get it. Well, you don't legally need to, but you should get input from them. You should figure out what people want. Figure out how to meet your business operational needs and how to meet your human capital needs. Then communicate the expectations, right? Talk to them. Don't make it feel like you're the powers that be that are ruling with the iron fist and telling them what they must do and what they can't do and all that. It's a tough place to be. Don't put yourself in that position where you're the bad cop. What have we been saying through all of this? We're all in this together, all that stuff that we've been putting in every email. I hope this email finds you well. I hope you and yours are safe during these uncertain times. We've been saying it in emails for 14 months or 16 months, 18 months. Let's show it. Let's show it to our employees who we actually care about. I say it to opposing counsel, and I don't like most of them. Here, I like people I work with. I'm saying those things. I want to show it, right? Figure out how to deal with issues. Just because people are remote doesn't mean they don't have HR issues. They don't have leadership issues. They don't have problems like that they need to address. It's still your obligation to deal with them. Figure out about supplies and expenses. If you haven't been reimbursing your employees that have been having to work at home, you should have, and you should talk about how to go back and fix that. Because you're opening yourself up for a claim that you don't want to have to deal with. It's far cheaper to just pay it than it is to roll the dice that someone's going to raise that claim. Confidentiality and security are important. I think this one, as we get back into the office, it's getting better and better. But bear in mind, we have more and more people working remotely. It's harder to trust. When I'm at the office, we've got all sorts of, firewalls and whatever. I don't know what our IT people do. I know they're great and they're very good at what they do, and it's all very protected. I also know that when I work from home, because even before COVID, I worked from home, a fair amount. I had to do, 18-step authentication, and I had to give like a blood sample and all of that to get logged in at home. But not all companies have that. And if you have a huge firewall at work and you're looking at protected information, and then your employees are going home and there's no firewall and they're on their network and they're on Starbucks network or whatever, you need to be prepared for that, because you're the ones who are going to have to answer to someone whose personal privileged information was leaked by one of your employees who wasn't paying attention to the firewall situation. So keep that in mind. Hopefully you've already been doing that, but I think it's important to continue to keep that in mind as our workforces just are going to do more teleworking in general from now on than ever before. Well, not during the height of COVID, but then they did pre-COVID. And then maintain morale. During COVID, we talked about maintaining morale because everyone was, not everyone, but a lot of people were remote. And so how do you keep them happy? How do you keep them content? You're doing, Zoom wine tasting, Zoom happy hours, Zoom escape rooms, all that stuff. How do you keep people engaged? Now, it's kind of the opposite, right? You've got some people that don't want to come back into work. So how do you maintain morale when you ask them to come back in? You have some grumpy people because they had to sit in the car for half an hour. They had to put pants on and come into the office. Be ready for that. These companies are taking a hit. Many industries, law is one of them, are seeing a tremendous amount of turnover, not out of the industry, just within the industry. The big wheel is turning, and quickly, in many, many, many industries. And it's just because people are just, morale's low and employees just are looking for fresh starts. Do what you can to keep your people happy and listen to them and appreciate where they're coming from, appreciate, as we've been saying throughout all this, that we are, in fact, all in it together. So with that, it's 12:52 right now, so we're a little early. I will open it up if there happen to be any questions from the group we have here today. Otherwise, again, I encourage any of you watching this elsewhere to we got a chat question, to ask me questions as you can. So let me read this question here that I got. So the question is about, kind of honor system vaccinations, right? So hey, is everyone vaccinated? What do you do about that? Well, technically, we're required to get proof, but it can be in the form of an attestation. So if you know, now, so the question is, what do you know? What happens if you know that a non-vaccinated person doesn't wear a mask? Well, the question is how you know and if you know for sure. Technically, if you know, you are supposed to, as an employer, instruct them to wear a mask because that's what the law says. And that's what the OSHA guidance says. I know that they may not be happy with that, but that is what the guidance says right now. We may get more guidance that says, okay, everyone do whatever you want. There are certainly states where that's the position that's been taken, but here in California, Cal OSHA rules the day when it comes to employers, and that's what's required of us. I will tell you anecdotally, not what the law says, but I will tell you anecdotally that a lot of employers are just kind of looking the other way. Not telling you that's a good thing, but it's a thing that is happening. But technically, the law is what it is. The guidance is what it is, and we're required to ensure or to have a record somewhere where we say, hey, at the very least, we spoke with so-and-so, they've confirmed that they have been vaccinated. And only those people are permitted to go non-vaxxed, or excuse me, non-masked, I should say. So thank you for that question. I think that's all I've got in the direct messages here. So again, I'll stick around for a minute or two. Well, I can stick along if there are more questions forever. And if not, again, if anyone in the peanut gallery here has questions, whether audio, video, or text, let me know. Otherwise, again, contact information is here. I'm here to be a resource. Let me help you. It's a tough time, but we'll get through it together.
Brian, I want to thank you for your time, and this was great. A lot of great information. So this will be posted on our website in a few days. So if you want to refer this workshop to someone else, they can watch it on the website. And we'll just leave it open for a few more minutes and see if there's any other questions. But thank you. Great information.
Thank you.